I'll do, because it's too late for me now to change my frame of analysis, is to make some general observations about contemporary state of human rights in Africa, walk a little bit through that, and then find a way of bringing into that discussion, that conversation, what is essentially part of human rights, violation of human rights, which presents itself in terms of human trafficking. Just general observations which then allow us to sketch out a little bit the contemporary crisis in Africa. Perhaps the first thing one can say is that the continent of Africa, being the cradle of humanity, allows us to understand resilience, tremendous human achievements, innovation, creativity, hospitality, and the lived sense of community, which is communalism. But that moment in both the past and present experience of Africa is somewhat punctuated, at times punctuated in a very profound way, by the history of violation of human rights. Put differently, the history of human rights in Africa, which human trafficking is a part of, is informed by the larger history of the continent. And in terms of violations, there have been moments in African history which one can refer to that provides us with legacies that affect events on the continent of Africa, which informs the nature, the pace, the consequences of human trafficking, which at times invites mass migration, including those of us who camped out of the continent as victims of persecution, and some who come out because the trigger is what is referred to as economic crisis, but the underlying factors are political in nature, social in nature. And that issue takes us back to some extent to that sad and tragic moment in our own experience, which is referred to the moment of the Atlantic slavery, trans-Saharan slavery, the Indian Ocean slavery, the Red Sea slavery, which contributed enormously to the construction, reproduction of the images of who Africans are, people of African descent, and constrained spaces which make it difficult for us to claim and gain the rights we should have. That moment then coincided with and overlapped in a number of instances with the third phase of European imperial expansion, which is generally referred to as a period of colonialism in Africa. And we see pervasive, widespread, systematic, intentional violation of human rights in terms of colonial genocide, whether it is in Namibia, in Algeria, in the Congo, or in various parts of Africa. We see the humanization of Africans, of the space. We see the fragmentation of society through policies of manipulation, of divide and rule, policies which then perpetuated underdevelopment and poverty, which later on would inform a laundry list of violation of human rights, including human trafficking. And then that period again coincided with another important period in the history of Africa, a period which oftentimes is referred to as the Cold War period. It was Cold War because it was ideological conflict between the East and the West. America did not go to war with the Soviet Union and the Allies, but it was hot and bloody and painful in Africa, Latin America, and other parts of the world. A period that ran almost all the way from the end of the conversation about the end of the Second World War in Tehran around 1944, all the way to the fall of the Berlin Wall, 1989-1990, in which proxy wars were fought in Africa. Millions of Africans were killed. Autocracy, dictatorship became the order of the day. The transition from democratic experiment to one-party rule to militarism became the order of the day in the continent of Africa. and militarism, corruption, and mass displacement population became part of that. All these, again, suffocated, constrained spaces for economic development, for aspiration of the people, for people to dream and realize their full potential. And then we come to this moment. I'm just trying to sketch it out very, very broadly, and then I'll try to bring in one or two issues about human trafficking. Then we come to the so-called post-Cold War era, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the retreat and at times decimation, collapse of the Soviet Union and socialism, and then there's this euphoria about a new world order, a world order that would be constructed largely around issues of rights, in which human rights would become central to foreign policy, to domestic policy, to economic policies. That moment presented space for democratic experiments in Africa. We see the rise of multi-party elections in Africa. We see the emergence of civil society organizations in Africa. And at least people beginning to push back, beginning to make claim about rights which are not defined in abstract terms, but rights which are lived, which people experience on the ground. But that space which opened briefly at that moment was again constrained, was suffocated, was blocked, and then experienced a new era. This era which is referred to the era of war against terror, in which we went back to the old system which had informed our experience in the Cold War, which allowed us to go to bed with terrorists, governments that are terrorists to their own people, as long as they're willing to do the bidding for us here in the West. And so we see that again being somewhat the big man moment in African history, whereby a ruler stays in power for 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years. Some stay in power until they can barely even walk. They still want to stand for elections. You see efforts to change constitutions, removing term limits, removing age limits. All these contribute to what at times what I'll touch on in passing. And what all these moments have done in terms of their consequences in terms of human rights, and then I'll sketch out the rest later, is that it turned, in one sense, the continent of Africa, this very beautiful piece of land with enormous human resources, in terms of minerals, in terms of oil, in terms of all that you can think about, literally turning it into a graveyard, where we see people dying in large numbers, where we see millions of people uprooted violently, displaced within the country, caged in that hostile terrain, or they flee from one war-torn society, one poverty-ridden society, to another war-torn society, another poverty-ridden society. Because the bulk of those of our own people who are violently displaced as a result of systematic violation of human rights do not come to America. They don't go to Britain. They don't go to France. They go to Canada. 99.9% of them languish in the same hostile, violent terrain on the continent of Africa. A few of them make the hostile journey across the Sahara. Some of them make the hostile journey on the Mediterranean Sea, in the death bath, in the coffins, and they perish as they leave Libya and other points from which they try to go to Europe. But some of the consequences of these moments in our history also as reproduce the all-invented, well-circulated, widely reproduced images of savages. The idea that Africans, by their very nature, are intellectually inferior. Africans, by their nature, cannot control, cannot govern themselves. They're barbaric. They only live and create a state in which there's anarchy and perpetual violence and lawlessness. It was invented, sold over and over again in the transatlantic slave trade, sold and circulated over and over again in the colonial period. And we have now given space for the revival of this image to be circulated again as a result at times of internal tension, contradiction, and failings on the part of African governments and African states. I'm not moving away from the external dimension of the crisis that continues to sustain that. But what that also does in short, is not only that it makes it difficult for us not to have safety, security. It's not that it makes it difficult for us to dream and aspire. Because human rights, of which human trafficking becomes part of that violation, is not a new concept. It's not a new practice in Africa. Wherever human beings exist, they begin to imagine a world in which there is freedom, in which there is dignity, in which they can live together with others in peace. And that imagination, informed by norms and culture, religious ideas, have always been there in Africa. It did not arrive with the arrival of the Europeans. What perhaps only came with the Europeans is the individualistic nature of human rights. Human rights that emerged from 1948 in response to the carnage, the violence, the fragmentation of World War II, an attempt to create a world in which people could live in a slightly different way so that war does not tear apart our society again. But with that then came the focus on the individuals, because in the context of African society, I am because we are. The concept of umutu, the concept of the collective was always there. And so let me now just touch before I run out of time, say one or two things about possible remedies, and then I'll touch a little bit on human trafficking. The remedies to many of the crises which envelop and imprison the African society, the African body, the African spaces, including the bodies, the minds, the presence of those in the diaspora, require us to have a critical understanding of the interplay of factors. Those that happened way back in the past, those that are happening now, that is past and present, internal to the continent of Africa, but also external to the continent of Africa. Okay, so violations of human rights, of which human trafficking is one, must be firmly located in the broader understanding of the history of the continent, past and present, internal and external, in a global sense as well. And so solution must address the root causes. And the root causes in the contemporary context, because we are here in the African diaspora, we may focus on the institutions, the infrastructure of inequality that give birth to violence and conflict, of which, of course, the emergence, the reproduction, the preservation of a very parasitic, vertical international economic system. One that was created for the purpose of keeping Africans in poverty. One was created and is maintained in a way that takes away the dignity, the rights of the people of Africa. That even when we lecture Africans about human rights, we don't lecture Africans about the right to development. We only focus on the political, the social rights. In other words, the right to life is defined in a very narrow way. Don't kill. It's not defined in a way that allows us to understand that we need the enabling environment, the environment that makes the life to right a reality. That one has access to health care, doesn't die from preventable diseases, for example. Okay? So we move away from that, we give the long lecture. But also, remedies to this crisis must compel us, people of African descent, and people who care about the continent of Africa. I'm not talking about those who have always celebrated the destruction, the collapse of the continent, and the sufferings of people of African descent, of which we have a prominent voice in the White House. Okay, white supremacy has always been there, but white supremacy has now acquired the platform it's always been looking for, whereby, of course, the president refers to us as coming from those enclaves that are terrible, that are dirty, that are dark, that are full of hallucination. And we try to push back, say, wait a minute, we come from a continent that functions. But the narrative from our part is wanting. It's wanting because events that unfold in the continent here and there sustain and reproduce not only the images but the lived experiences of Africans who flee, who die in large numbers, who starve to death. And so there's a need for us to focus on internal transformation of the continent of Africa. There's a need for us to assume responsibility. Okay, we are not putting away the external factors at all. We need to focus on what we can do, and that becomes important for us who are here in the diaspora. The only way you can achieve your dignity here in the United States of America in a way that is fitting is for you to recognize that human rights are universal, they are fundamental, and they must be practiced in that manner in Africa. That rights in Africa do not only belong to the ethnic group, the religious group you come from. It belongs to all human beings who inhabit the territory. Put differently, if I were a Christian, I'll go back to a scripture and pick a version, a part of the scripture that says, to proclaim that the Lord God is your God, you must begin from Jerusalem. Jerusalem is your family. Jerusalem is your community. To claim that human rights matter because now you understand it, you feel it. As you were coming out of the continent of Africa, you understood it. As you landed here in the Americas, you feel it. As you walk around, you understand it. You know the pain of being seen as an outsider, as someone without rights and dignity. Now that you know all those things, you may become agent of change that provides space for healing in our own African communities here. That we don't bring with us the conflict that uprooted us back home. That we don't begin to live as members of one ethnic group against another, reproducing what caused violation of human rights. That we can come together here as people who come from one country, people who come from one continent, and people who belong to the human race, building alliances, professing and acting out what is important for promotion and protection of human rights. Now, let me just now touch in passing, because it should have been the main focus of my discussion, which I think Nancy communicated very well to me, but I was in the middle of nowhere. I was in a space where people live as in a zone of non-being, where millions of people are caged, uprooted and caged within the continent as internally displaced persons and as refugees. And because I was there, I didn't have time to pay more attention to our note. So the assumption I made was that I was going to talk about human rights. But now I know the human rights I was supposed to focus on is the violation of the rights of the people, which leads to human trafficking. Okay. Now then, in the context of human trafficking, which we can draw directly from this broad terrain of human rights, and from the violations of human rights in that terrain, it oftentimes referred to the functional, and what I'm going to do here briefly is provide you more with the lived experiences, not the abstract, the theoretical discussion, which at times can work very well in an academic setting, in peer-reviewed news articles and books. Is that human trafficking is oftentimes referred to as the commodification of the person, turning a human being with fundamental rights and dignity into an article of trade with exchange and use value, objectification of the person, taking away what makes one human, and turning that human being into an article of trade, which now speaks to issues of slavery. Because slavery historically is defined depending on the society, depending on the period in time. Slavery in Africa much earlier on, even where it was marginal, it still contained significant elements of rights. Slavery in the plantation settings did not have rights at all. Okay, so the definition depends on the terrain, depends on the period, depends on what we're looking at. But human trafficking reminds us of that moment in which the human being becomes an article of trade. And that article is produced. The transformation from being a human being to an article of trade is carried out through violence. Violence in terms of kidnapping the victim. Violence in terms of keeping the victim contained under violence. And deception. If only you go to America, if only you go to Britain, to Canada, you will become a nurse. You'll work as a nurse. You'll work as a teacher. The deception is that those who will take you out of the continent know very well that they're taking you out of the continent to exploit you, provide forced and unpaid labor, to turn you into prostitutes, okay, and at times to extract important parts of your organs. Because human trafficking does not refer to the transfer of human beings from one place to the next within the country and outside the country, but also focuses on the extraction, the harvesting of organs, the harvesting of human parts. At times, the harvesting of human parts in the context of Africa tends to focus on the response to the failed experiment of state building, of nation building, in which poverty is tearing apart societies with abundance of resources, okay, but where corruption is endemic, where a handful of people have tons and tons of money that is banked overseas, where their children and their spouses and their relatives come for treatment overseas, when the majority of our own people in the continent have no access to them, okay? So one of the responses to this crisis on the continent is that people have gone back and reinvented some old forms of beliefs, whereby there are times think that if only you go before a certain traditional healer, you can become a rich person. The traditional healer might require body parts. Okay, so the extraction, vesting of body parts is part of the broader attempt. In one sense, it's a vote of no confidence in many of the post-colonial African societies. Okay, people going back say, well, if you want to become rich, all you have to do is kill an innocent girl. Bring this body part. Okay, it's happening in many parts of Africa. Okay, my role here is not. I started by saying that this is a continent with tremendous achievements, okay? But I'm also an activist. I'm not just a scholar. I'm an activist, and I'm an advocate. I want to focus on the crisis in the continent and how we can help that. And as part of the definition, the function of modern slavery is also the question of vulnerability. The victims are also quite vulnerable. The poor, the unemployed, the displaced population, the women who face abuse, the failure to provide protection to those within the country who are members of the country, the failure to provide protection for those who are uprooted. Turn all these people, and there are millions and millions of them that want only one thing: they want security. They want human security. The search for human security in a society that doesn't provide them with a space makes them vulnerable to human trafficking. Okay, so we see children being trafficked, we see women being trafficked in large numbers, we see people dying on the way, trying to come to areas where they think the pull factor is this emerging availability of things. It is emerging because oftentimes the more we move towards it, the faster it retreats from us. It is mythical by and large, but it does take place, and exploitation and transfer. Now from the understanding the terrain in Africa, we now know the causes are fairly easy. One is in the global development, the so-called globalization, which is largely a one-way traffic, one way in terms of extraction of resources from one part of the world. It is one way in terms of depolarization of keeping society poor. When I leave America as an American who has been brought up here, I go to Ghana, I go to Nigeria, I go to Cameroon, I am considered to be an expatriate. When an African tries to come here, the African is a poverty-stricken economic immigrant, okay? You can have tens of thousands of Europeans going to Africa, and no one begins to doubt that they are human beings with rights and dignity. But when a handful of Africans attempt to come to America, go to Britain, to Canada, all of a sudden then they are parasites, okay? It's a one-way traffic. The way we maintain the national economic system is intended to do exactly what it does: dislocate societies in Africa and turn large numbers of people into victims of human trafficking. Okay? So when we condemn human trafficking, we must condemn the system that gives birth to it. And we are responsible for that system that gives birth to it. That system implicates internal crises within Africa itself. So we have that, we have wars, and wars, when wars are fought for a variety of reasons, many of the wars in Africa are fought over minerals, over oil in Africa. The wars are funded by mining companies that come from Britain, from America, from Canada, okay, from Germany, from France. They work with warlords in Africa to create instability that allows for the extraction without accountability at all, okay? We have wars. Wars then turn some people into this type of situation, where children become child soldiers, where people live on the front line on a daily basis. Go to South Sudan. Go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, the capital of mass rape in Eastern Congo, in which almost close to 200,000 women have been raped over and over again, in which as you walk towards the victims, you can smell the stench from a distance. You understand. 20 years war in Southern Africa, Angola, Mozambique, war in Liberia, war in Eritrea, war in Ethiopia, war in the Sudan, South Sudan now, going on. These are the type of environment that reproduce in underdevelopment and poverty, and create many people to become victims of human trafficking. But also our asylum and refugee policies, intended not anymore to be based on international refugee law. The refugee law, the foundation of that law is no refoulement. Do not send back someone who has faced persecution to where the person will face persecution. Now the implementation of the asylum and refugee policy is the numbers game. Not persecution anymore, the numbers game. How many can we demonstrate our people that will allow in? The less the number, the stronger we are on national security. Okay? So now we have locked out people who genuinely need and deserve protection. The only way they can attempt to come to this society, because now they live on the front line. They live in refugee camps. They live in internally displaced camps where people wither away on a daily basis. Death is a distinct possibility. It happens on a daily basis. The question is, when and how will it happen to me? They then take the risk on the Mediterranean Sea. They then take the risk of being caged in containers and trafficked and brought to America. Put simply, human trafficking in one important way is a response to the xenophobic nature of the asylum and refugee policy. Okay? You don't want me to come here openly. I face persecution. You are signatory to the convention, or at least the protocol. You don't allow me in. How else do I come? Someone has to steal me in. So what I go through, the children who die on the way, the women who are raped, who are maimed, okay? They are maimed, they're raped, they are killed on the way because of our policies that does not provide the space for me to come and claim asylum, okay? So the only way I can do is I can be brought indirectly. And it also reflects to some extent now, let me go back to Africa. It reflects the pervasive nature of corruption. Corruption is human rights violation. People die in large number because the resources which could have been invested in healthcare to save life is pillaged. The resources that could have been invested productively in education to allow children to begin to dream and to develop, okay, is taken away. They are then on their own. The corruption takes away resources that could be invested in the community that allows development, economic activities to take place. Unemployment becomes mass unemployment. The result, one of the results is, I try to flee if I can, and I come to America. How can I get to America? It's only if someone is able to traffic me across. And it also reflects the regional dimension of the crisis. Let me now just conclude, because I think you're asking yourself precisely, you're asking yourself what exactly I'm trying to say. If you haven't followed me, then it means you've paid quite a bit of attention. Okay, because it was intended that you should follow me. No, I'm kidding. Okay, in terms of the functions, now we know our people who are brought from within the country, within Nigeria, within Cameroon, within South Africa, within Kenya, internal human trafficking, from urban to rural, from rural urban centers in large numbers. Some children are taken there so that they can begin to beg along on the streets. People take them for that purpose. Some of the children then are brought out of the country without the consent of their parents by humanitarian organizations that are supposed to be taking care of orphans and the like. Human trafficking by NGOs, okay, humanitarian organization, okay, that are engaged in some form of entrepreneurship, okay, takes place. We have a large number of our own people who move from one country to the next within Africa and then end up in Italy, then end up in France, then end up in other parts of the world, and all of them end up becoming largely prostitutes. I'm sure you've met parents of victims of trafficking at times when they find out that child has been tortured, has been raped over and over again. They begin to cry and demand that she should go back home. But you know, the way the traffickers work is that they exert enough threat on the family. If the victim reports them, then see the picture of your mother, see the picture of your daughter back home, see the picture of your father. They'll all be dead now, okay? So that takes place from time to time outside here. But also in some situations we have to be honest with ourselves. Because we are so poor, not poor because we don't work hard, not poor because there's no resources, but because the state itself has completely blocked opportunity for us to make it. Willingly, in this constrained situation, we offer our daughters to go overseas. We know what she's going to do, they're going to do. Because next door, the daughters that went send money back, and there's a big bungalow that has been built here, okay? Our daughter must also go and send money to build big bungalow. We know it, we understand it. What it means, therefore, is important transformation must begin in Africa. And poverty is what it is. And I think perhaps let me try to be polite and say that I think I'm done. And I'll entertain questions later. Thank you.
Wow. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tunu. We appreciate that very sensitive topic, and it touches almost everybody. Again, thank you very much, and I hope we can have you for a whole day, just designed for your, that kind of information regarding that topic. Maybe Nancy and the board will, down the road, have you for like a full day or half a day. You deserve it. Thank you very much. And now let's, I don't know if Olivia is here. Okay, we have one last speaker. We have one last speaker is coming to talk, is from the Global, I think, Chamber of Commerce. Please take the podium. We welcome you. Let's give welcome Olivia Kamanzi. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Olivier Kamanzi. I'm the president and CEO of Africa Global Chamber of Commerce. I live here in Chicago. I'm originally from Rwanda. I'm African diaspora. I'm excited to be here this morning. Before I start, I want to give a special thank to United African Organization leadership, to Arikaba, to Nancy, to all of you board members here. I'm grateful to be invited today to share with you what the Chamber is doing as far as is about global investment in doing business in Africa. I'm going to change a little bit the conversation. I'm going to bring more positive things. I heard my brother here talking about slavery, trafficking. I'm going to take you to a different direction. What really is about Africa is changing. We talked about the wars. The wars are a little bit over, so we are going towards a period of, let's say, prosperity. And what you see here, I just want to show you how doing business in Africa is the way to go. Before I get started, I want just to ask you a few questions, one or two questions. What's the biggest, largest population in the world? Which country has the largest population? Anyone knows? India, correct. What's the second? The second country? China, correct. What's the third? No? United States, right? So just to give you, someone mentioned about Nigeria. According to a World Bank report 2015, Nigeria is projected to, by 2050, Nigeria will be 350 million people, meaning that Nigeria will be the third in terms of population. You can imagine how now Africa has become significant in terms of investing in Africa. Now, let me see now, next. So I will touch a little bit about what is about the Africa Global Chamber of Commerce. The next, what the global market is about. And then I will discuss about how do you get information when you're really looking to invest in Africa. And then we talk about a little bit what potentials, and then we'll go back to doing business in Africa, opportunities, and then I will end with activities. What AGCC or African Global Chamber of Commerce is doing to promote Africa as well as global markets. I won't be too long. I will make sure maybe 10, 15 minutes I do my best. Thank you so much. So now the mission of the Chamber is to promote trade, investments, educational exposures, cultural exchanges globally for African economic interests and its partners, including the United States of America. So this can only be through the collaboration with other organizations, such as our sister organization, UAO, and academic institutions, and so on and so forth. So we advocate in terms of policies, and in terms of the trade barriers, we make sure those not tariff barriers are really broken down. We talk about, promote in terms of inbound and outbound FDIs or foreign direct investments. We also work with regional trade blocs such as COMESA, East African Community, and ECOWAS, or East African Economic Region. Also, we talked about the policy in terms of intra-trade. The Africans must trade amongst ourselves. This one is very significant because I believe last month or the beginning of this month, Africa has known the one of significant advancement in terms of trade unification. We had what we call Africa Continental Trade Agreement area. So it was signed in Kigali a couple of weeks ago. Meaning that customs will be broken down. We can trade between Tanzania and Kigali, in Rwanda, in Nigeria, or across the continent, we can trade amongst ourselves. And AGOA, or African Growth Opportunity Act, which is an act which has been enacted by the United States, promoting products coming from Africa entering US market free of tax. We will also work on that policy. Another piece of policy is a Power Africa initiative, which has become a Rectify Africa Act, which was enacted by United States Congress. Now the Power Africa initiative is a policy, is a law in the land. So we do some programs such as sales, marketing, and the branding. We help our small businesses really to learn how to brand their business, to how they can learn how to really to increase their sales, also brand their business. This is a dedicated program we do every year to make sure we equip our small businesses. Those businesses, they will be able to export the products to Africa from here. Also, we do Youth Entrepreneurship Summit. We provide mentorship programs, annual summit. For example, on July 12th through 13th, we will have one of the largest youth summits here in the United States, which has never been any time before. We will receive over 45 African youth entrepreneurs. They will come here and they meet US youth through what we call US Africa Youth Entrepreneurship Summit. It will take place here in Chicago. Energy and gas, and also is something we also focus on Power Africa initiatives as one of our program. We deal with what we call infrastructure, or African 50 is a fund that has been created by African Development Bank, which is based in Cote d'Ivoire. They are raising $100 million to fund to fund the project in the area for energy. We work with them very closely. And then we do some community radio shows. We partner with some African very owned radio programs to promote the work we are doing here in Chicago and globally. And the last is what we call Africa Speakers Series. Every month we receive African delegations, mostly ambassadors. They come from Washington, D.C. We hold what we call a monthly business networking event through the Africa Speaker Series. They come here, then they talk about what kind of investment opportunities are available in any given African nation. So now let's see, how do we understand global markets? If you want to really to do business in Germany or somewhere else, you really need to learn how do I get information about that market. So what you do is make sure you come to the events like this one, you learn what's going on, and you have to connect with foreign investors. I can give you my personal experience. I invest in Africa. I have a company in Senegal, in Gambia. I just came back, just launched a company in Gambia, in Ghana, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of work we do. Basically, I have two hats, one for the chamber, one also. The chamber does not feed me, correct? So I have my private investment group. So that's how I put the food on the table. So you can attend some industry conferences, roundtables. That's how you learn how the global markets work. You have to do some research, look at what analysts are saying about a particular market, and then, or suppliers, bankers, CPAs, CFPs, or shipper. All those are people, professionals you can learn. Also, you can join a Chamber of Commerce. If you join the Africa Global Chamber of Commerce, we really make sure you have all resources available to you to make sure you are educated. You know how you can go around investing in the foreign markets, particularly Africa. So where to get information, as I mentioned before, through international trade centers or consultants, they will help you. The trade associations, as I mentioned before, International Chamber of Commerce, COMESA, which is a Southern Africa regional customs union, and the East African Community, West African Regional Bloc, SADC, or Southern SBDCs. Those are SBDCs are in charge of business centers, or Africa Trade Center within Africa Global Chamber of Commerce. We do also conduct seminars, workshops, trade export counselors, investors association, seasoned experts, exporters, or social media like LinkedIn and Facebook, Twitter, and so on. That's really where you can get information. Now let's go to the topic of today. That was just giving you a global picture. Africa is, as I mentioned before, if you don't do today, you don't start doing business in Africa, you are missing something. Don't just focus on the wars. Even during the war periods when you make money, right? When you're investors, you want to make money, the high risk, high return, right? So obviously, you also have to have stability in the country to be able to invest. Though, if you look I will excuse myself by my time, 2013. I could see the highest growth with 6% growth in Africa. And then 7 out of 10 fastest growing markets in the world are located in Africa. 7 out of 10. So as I mentioned before, today the rate of return for foreign investment in Africa is the highest than any other developing nation. That's the McKinsey report. The highest investors in Africa are China, Turkey, and India. So United States is come as the 4th or 5th place. It's not the first investor on Africa. So Africa is actively reforming. So today we have 75 out of 230 regulatory reforms. Worldwide, 75 reforms are in Africa. This is a study between 2013 and 2014. Maybe when I come back next time, I will give you the current numbers. And the US business and the professional services and technology and the companies indicated that it is important to invest and do business in Africa. US companies present in Africa, the majority are in South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, and Ghana. Just giving you, those are US companies are mostly in those countries, the largest economies on the continent. So as I mentioned before, 2016, top 10 African fastest growing economies were Cote d'Ivoire, with the growth of 8.5%. And then we had, we had Cote d'Ivoire, and then we had a few countries like Botswana, Mauritius, Tunisia, Morocco, Seychelles, Zambia, Namibia, and Swaziland. Those were the fastest growing economies in 2016. And let me see. So now, the US companies find that Africa is more attractive than Asia and Latin America and Russia. That's a survey from Alex Partners. Also, US companies present in Africa, majority, as I mentioned before, I said also the fastest growing, you can see the countries are here. And then the last one, I have to mention, is the key areas of investing in Africa. If you are looking to do business in Africa, what sectors are you looking at? Mostly will be infrastructure, agribusiness, energy and power, education, healthcare, information communication technology, financial services, and the human capital development. Those are mostly areas where we should be looking at. They have highest return on investments. Let's see each one what's going on. So, and let me see here, foreign investment. So, giving you what in terms of FDIs, foreign direct investment into Africa, by 2016 stood at 66.5 billion. They were down from 87 billion in 2015. So that's number 2016. I will find out 2017. Next year, maybe I will give you the number. That's the number I could find. And if FDI in Africa, 8% of growth of FDI was in 2015. So foreign direct investment into African capital investment 2015 were, and mostly was in energy, electricity, manufacturing, construction, ICT, and the internet, logistics, transportation, and the business services. Now those are really some more exciting information, but now what are really challenges we are still facing to attract more investors to come and do business in Africa? Mostly are transparency. In terms of regulatory, as we are reforming, we still have to have transparency in how we do business in Africa. Also, another shortcomings we are facing is about corruption or bad governance. We have to do more work really to attract more investors because they're still saying, oh, there is some corruption in Africa. But however, as we know, corruption is everywhere. It's not just Africa. In my own city here in Chicago, we know what's going on, right? So corruption is not an excuse not going to invest in Africa. Even here is going on. But however, not promoting for corruption, but just saying you have to learn the culture, you need to know how Africans do business. In that way, you have to look at specialists, experts in Africa that can help you to, in a way you can go around those issues you may face when you go to invest in Africa. And there are some numbers also I want to share with you. If you look in energy or manufacturing, those are the top investment if you're looking to invest in Africa. However, some countries are doing diversification in terms of investment, not just in mining or in energy. We're looking really to open up other sectors. So as what we know, with energy crisis, with oil price going down, many countries that are big oil producers, such as Nigeria, Angola, or what else? Nigeria, Angola, what else? Large producing oil. Ghana also now is producing oil. Those already have seen the price going up, going down. The growth has gone down. Now they're really thinking how to diversify or bring other sectors and attract investors in other sectors. So as I mentioned, the power is the key for us, especially for us, African Global Chamber of Commerce. The Power Africa Initiative is a big issue. If Africa has developed, we have to address the issue of energy. As you know, you can see the numbers on the other side. 60 million people in sub-Saharan Africa has no electricity. Is a big concern. So how can we address us? The need now to address the issue for almost more than 500 million people. As you know, Africa is comprised by around 1.2 billion population. Basically, 50% of population are out of electricity. It's a big problem. We cannot develop if we don't address the issue for energy. The money that is needed to address the issue is around 300 billion US dollars. It's huge. That's the reason why I told you Africa is coming up with our own solutions. We can't rely on foreign aid or foreign partners to come to solve our own problems. We have to fix our own problems to begin with. The partners will come join us to help us. As I said, from 300 billion US dollars, Africa, what is doing through African Development Bank, they have raised over 50 billion US dollars. The target is to go to up to 100 billion US dollars to address issue of power. US government has put in place, has raised around 30 billion US dollars to support energy in Africa. That the policy which has been was implemented by President Obama. Under his administration, he went to Africa. When he was in South Africa is when he announced the launch of a Power Africa initiative. Private institutions, private companies here in the US, with government, they partnered together and they raised 30 billion US dollars. This money is available to invest energy in Africa. I'm just quoting you. If you need more information, we work with Power Africa section within State Department. So you can come to the chamber, we'll give you more information if you are really interested in investing in energy or you are really looking into that sector. We will connect you, we'll connect you with them so you can be able to raise funds to invest in your project in Africa as far as energy is concerned. So quickly, what we are doing right now, we just concluded yesterday a big third annual Africa Small Business Expo at the Sullivan High School. We're pleased to have Senator Dick Durbin, who was our keynote speaker. And we had also the office of the US representative or Congresswoman, Jen Tchaikovsky. She was also represented in the room. Also, we have a private businesses, especially in our community. What I can just say was really amazing to see our community, how they came out to display their products and services, whether the hair braiders or fashion designers, restaurants, everybody came out and they come and then exhibit their products. I was really pleased to see all those people coming out. So next, what's coming up? We have US Africa Youth Entrepreneurship Summit that will take place at the University of Chicago on July 12 and the 13th. I'm really inviting you, all of us, we need to come together if we had to support our youth. Let me just pause a little bit, like 2 minutes. Our priority at the chamber is women and the youth. Because we believe Africa cannot develop if we don't empower our women. So our focus is on women entrepreneurs. What we do, we receive women entrepreneurs from Africa coming to Chicago to really come to look at the US markets. Last year, we received 30 women from various countries from Africa. We did a partnership with Chicago. We hosted them here in Chicago in collaboration with the State Department. So I was really pleased. Next, the youth is 65% of population in Africa are youth. We can't develop Africa if we not focus on empowering our youth in terms of entrepreneurship, because the issue jobs is an issue. We cannot rely on jobs. We have to be creative. Entrepreneurship and innovation is going to be a key to transform Africa through youth. And I mentioned already about the Africa Speakers Series. We will receive Senegal in September. During the summertime, we pause between August and Just we take a break in August, and then we come back in September. Lastly, we will have annual fundraising gala night. So you're welcome, and we'll be glad to have you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kamanzi. And right now, we are almost coming to the end of this annual Chicago African Summit. And with that, there is a special person who is supposed to give a vote of thanks. I don't know if there were any questions to what to the oh, there was a question for Mr. Kamanzi? Okay.
Oh, thank you very much, sir, for the exhilarating speech. Once again, my name is Gideon Adeola, and while you are speaking, I was thinking about many things, and one of those things is this. You have spoken a lot, like I said. Africa as a continent don't have any, excuse. We don't have any excuse to be poor, but irrespective of all the natural resources that we have, sadly, we are poor. Now, what I'm thinking is this. I tried a lot of things while I was in Africa before coming to this climb, and sadly, I failed. Now, I have a question, sir. And the thing is, why is it that Africa is poor, even with all of these resources? Now, the smart youth in Africa that are jobless, even after going to, after going through higher institution, having all the knowledge and all of that, some of them refused to go to the labor market by looking for job, and they try to create the job by themselves by going into agricultural sector, for example. And unfortunately, they got their fingers burnt, which is very sad. It's not. We don't have to regret going into investing in agricultural sector. But the thing is, sadly, many of us. I tried it in Africa. I failed while I was in Africa. I count myself lucky meeting your kind today. I count myself lucky standing side by side with you today. On the contrary, in China, for example, which happens to be, one of the countries that invest more in Africa today as a result of the resources they see there. Why? In China, for example, their countries give money, give the resources, financial resources, to potential investors to go into Africa and, look at these resources and, and explore. But sadly, in Africa, we don't have something like that. There are thousands of smart investors in Africa. My question, before I forget, is this. Is it limited, like you spoke about mentorship, your mentorship what is it, program, is it limited to this climb, or if I have business partners in Africa that have tried many things so many times and got their fingers burnt, is your mentorship program, do you reach out to them? That was one of those things. That was one of my questions. And another thing is contact. I was trying to take pictures while you are, on the projector. Can we have contacts or something whereby we can, get across to you, sir? This is my, speech. Thank you very much, sir.
Hello, my name is Allison Kennard, and I just want to piggyback on what this gentleman just said. First of all, I want to say I am very honored to be here today. Nick Costello, who has a booth out there, I work in conjunction with him. He has a school in Africa teaching 300 Nigerian children in the village. I took a DNA test and got my DNA back and have a lot of African in me, and I won't name the countries, but I do have Cameroon. I'll shout that out. That's the largest. But I'm with this brother right here as I sit back there, and all the wonderful things that you have both so eloquently stated, I'm just so moved. And I just want to say what I gained from that, and just to say, too, I get so annoyed knowing that our people over there in Africa, are there struggling so hard with just the basic needs of human dignity, human rights, human, wanting to progress. And it's just such a setback on all the things that are going on in the country. And my heart bleeds too to know that, as this gentleman said, there's so much resources there. I teach in school, and I remember we did the African study in a history class, and the students, and I work in a Jewish school, and one thing I'm gonna say, we have to teach our children more than ever before. Those children get it. They make sure they read African studies. They read about African Americans. And if another culture can know more about your culture than you know about your culture, guess what? They're empowered. So they have the control, they have the knowledge. Knowledge is power. And if we don't have it and we don't take it and learn from our ancestors, learn from our teachers, then we will fall by the wayside. Then other countries can come in. I have a heartburn when I see other countries coming in. Don't want to name them because I don't really want to be on the record, but you know who they are, coming over there, and they extract the resources. And as I was looking at the resources in Africa, the richest one, it says Botswana. It says 99% of the world's chrome is in Africa, 85% of its platinum, 70% of the world's tantalum, 68% of cobalt, 54% gold, diamonds, $24 trillion in diamond is in Botswana. So now you wonder why all these other countries are heading right over there to those countries. Because if you're sleeping, they got the goodies, and they got the power, and they got the knowledge. We have to wake up, we have to teach our people. We have to stay there, we have to preserve, we have to fight. God gave us that country. China is fighting, they're burning their resources. That's why they're coming, it's in here. They're running out, they need a place to feed their people. It's about resources, never ever forget it. Those are the wars of the world, to preserve your resources, which God has given you. You're African, we stay there, we keep it, we fight for it. That's it.
Thank you so much. Sister, I think you responded to some of his questions. That's great. So let me say this. We have everything. We have a human capital. We have resources. As my sister just mentioned, a country like a DRC, 80% of coltan is if you have your cell phones with you, right? To manufacture a cell phone, there's a mineral called coltan. 80% of a mineral to produce the cell phone is located in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. If today DRC will have to decide no more export to this mineral, we no longer have cell phones, right? We know the biggest manufacturers of cell phones. Second, cobalt. Coltan or cobalt is used for electric cars. As we know, the third generation after Industrial Revolution, we're going to have the third revolution will be Industrial Revolution was back then. The next third generation is going to be about those electrical cars or the new generation we see going on. Then meaning that the world is going to need Africa. if you are going to produce robotics, electric cars, those cell phones, all of those things we need every day is from Africa. So what are we missing? It's just mindset. If we change the way we think, the way we see things, we have everything. We have a brilliant, I heard my brothers here, my brother here, my sister, those who preceded me, eloquently were speaking. We have all we take. I can give you an example. I went to Rwanda. I built the Rwanda Stock Exchange from scratch, from zero to where it is right now. I brought so many companies around the world. That's when you see the progress going on in Rwanda. We have been a part of this. I came from diaspora because what I was reading here in your program was the contribution of diaspora in this country and in Africa. That's why we need to go back to Africa and then contribute to what's going on. We change those mindset. That's number one we need to do. My brother was asking about mentorship. As I mentioned before, youth mentorship is not limited to young people. It's to everyone needs a mentor, right? All of us, when you're in business, you need a mentor, someone really to take you where you need to be. We are open. I'm here. I can exchange business cards with you. I have them with me. So if you need any support, any help, especially I'm 1 month I'm in Africa, 1 month I'm in Chicago. So because my heart's in Africa, I'm Pan-Africanist. Everything I do is about Africa. So if you need to do business in Africa, my brother, you are struggling doing business in Nigeria. I have my clients in Nigeria. I can give you the long name in Nigeria. Next month, I'll be opening a business in Nigeria. We can talk about how I can work with you in Nigeria, right? That's a mentorship. Mentorship does not have any limit, right? The second thing you mentioned was about the China helping their businesses to export their products, especially through finance. They have what they call Exim Bank, Import-Export Bank of China. Same way you have a United States Import-Export Bank of the United States of America. In Africa, we have that already. As a matter of fact, it's located in Nigeria. We have Exim Bank in Africa. It's lack of information. Sometimes we don't know what's going on. The chamber is here to provide you information. They may not have enough resources needed to support our businesses. It's us to support them, to help them now to become even better. Those companies, China comes when a manufacturer, someone is manufacturing like cars, they want to export to Africa. China provides them financial resources to be able to export their cars. Also, we need to support our business in Africa. Someone, a Nigerian company or a Ghanaian company or a Botswana company, will be able to support our businesses to be able to export their cars elsewhere in the world. Thank you so much.
Once again, good afternoon. I have a question for both speakers. I think you must be applauded for pinpointing the cause of Africa's underdevelopment from both the political and economic factors. My interest in Africa has been long-standing as a student of politics and as a member of a founding member of the African-American Chamber of Commerce of the 90s in Chicago. From my experience, I realized you do a great job. There's no doubt about that. Great job. The brother brought up from analytical exposure of the causes of underdevelopment in terms of the human trafficking in Africa. By far, we will see that Africa is the worst in terms of in terms of human trafficking, because it dates to not only from slavery, where over 100 million people suffered, then through colonialism, where they came in and then did our work eternally, and through the neo-colonial structure state, which led to the wars. You addressed them perfectly. My question to you, then, before I come to you, is we've seen all this up in Africa, and this well stated that, look, the problem must be started eternally. That's true. That's what it takes. It takes eternal. Africans have to be bold and say enough is enough. Yes. I've seen you as a progressive scholar. But one thing which is lacking in Africa, there is no correlation between the progressive scholar and the activists on the field. How can we address that issue to bring about a change in Africa eternally? Eternally, yes, I'm interested in that. Secondly, in terms of the chamber, we realize it's the powers that be, economic powers that be, that determine now development in areas of the world. We know, look, especially with Korea, it's open. North Korea is being asked to give up nuclear weapons so that they could be developed to come in terms with South Korea, right? You see it. In Africa specifically, recently Rwanda wanted to promote its garment industry. So he said, look, I'm not importing used clothing from the United States. Place a ban on that. What did they do? Trump ordered that the benefits from under the trade law with Africa should be stopped.
Could you just ask the question?
Okay. 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 Trump asked that the benefits should be cut. So we see there's a political issue. How are you as a chamber dealing with the political factor? Also addressing, that. We see you doing good on the economic trends and all that. So my question is the political factor. Yeah.
Okay. To be fair, we have 5 minutes to close this, but also there is a gentleman at the back brought this question to both. So we have 5 minutes. The gentleman at the back said, many of the problems Dr. Otunu mentioned greatly prevent or hinder investment in Africa, especially for the average person. So as you summarize, you take, we have like maybe 2 to 3 minutes, 3 minutes. And then we close, but
Okay. Do you want to come first?
You're very polite, aren't you? Okay, let me just address the first question, which focus on the need for activism, advocacy, and specifically as relates to perhaps scholars doing their work. I think the task at hand requires all of us, because the tendency at times is for those of us who have gone to school, who have papers in our hands, to become extremely arrogant and to be detached from reality, and to assume that we have quite enough information to impose our worldviews on ordinary people. I think the struggle on the ground is the struggle for ordinary people. And I think it is a question of providing them with space, providing with opportunity, and pushing as much as we can to help them realize their full dignity. Because that then they can own it. It empowers them. I think the other one has to do with the crisis in Africa and the need for development. I think it's not either or. It is important for development, for investment to take place in Africa, but it must be development which is human-centered. It must be development that addresses issues of inequality. It must be investment that speak to the dignity, to accessibility, accountability, legitimacy of the state, of institutions, of ordinary people. Thank you.
You asked a question about the second-hand clothing industry policy And maybe I can give those who are not aware about this, what's going on, I can give you a quick summary of what's going on. The East African community, as a regional bloc, has decided to ban the second-hand clothes coming from anywhere, including United States, within the 6 partner states in Africa. Rwanda has become the first one to implement that policy in the East African community. Kenya is the biggest exporter of textile to US market. And here in the US, the second-hand clothes is a big industry here, very powerful. They are lobbyists, it's very, very big. They don't want this to lead to the implementation of that policy that has been agreed upon with East African partner states. Those East African countries are Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan. Those 6 countries have decided to ban the second-hand clothes. And then Rwanda has taken ahead further step. They implement the policy immediately. They banned anything coming from the United States as second-hand clothes. And that's why now the administration of Trump is saying they're looking into the AGOA, as I mentioned before, these African Growth and Opportunity Acts that really brings African products to US free of tax, now to remove Rwanda from the list of AGOA countries, eligible countries. Those are sub-Saharan countries. The AGOA does not include those Arab countries within Africa. And that's where we are. So the challenge we have as a chamber is, even within the African partner states are not really coming together to agree if they're going to go ahead and implement the policy. Kenya, because the big exporter, they have not implemented the policy. I'm not sure about Tanzania. I have to double check where Tanzania is, but the biggest exporter is Kenya, is not really coming forward to say, we are going to implement this. So for us at the chamber to advocate of what's going on between Rwanda and the United States in terms of banning, in terms of removing the country from, yes, right. So it's, for us, we want this unity between the partner states. So now when we advocate, we have on one voice, countries speaking on one voice. That's really where we are. I can't give you a position of the chamber as we are speaking. We believe African nations are sovereign. They can take the decisions, they can do whatever they want. But as you know, the United States is a big economy, so we cannot ignore the trade between those countries in the United States. So we are there somewhere in between. We're following up. We are looking what these countries are going, what they want. If they are ready to implement the policy, the chamber will be behind to support, and then we can advocate on behalf of the United States government. Then last question was about, because most of the businesses are very small, how can you invest when you are a small business? I think that was a question. I think we need to come together. When you are very small, you really unite, you come together, you consolidate your power with others, and then you become strong. That's why we came as a chamber. A chamber is a business-based organization. Is really bringing all businesses in our community to come together. So when we come together, we can build you, we can help you to connect with those businesses around there. So then you will be able to access to big resources, be able to go and invest in Africa. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Dr. Tunu. Thanks, Mr. Kamanzi. And yeah, I think you've taken this. Yeah. And now we would like to invite the vice chair, board chair, to come and, give a vote of thanks to all our speakers who came in before. So it's a pleasure to have you all.
Thank you. Well, good thing must come to an end, right? but this was so resourceful. The knowledge imparted here today cannot be explained. I mean, I learned a whole lot, and I'm sure the same applies to everyone who is here. We are so grateful and honored as an organization to have various speakers to come and give us knowledge. And you save this day for us. It's very, very much appreciated. Thank you to the organizers, starting from the board chair and with the giant lady that runs this organization, Nancy. Without her, when an African person says, it means a lot. But she is so strong. Most of my thank you is going to start from her. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for all those who left their homes today and came here to support us. Thank you to Ali Kaba. Maybe he's going to get this information. We're working on it. Whatever he left us to do, we're doing it. And we are so grateful to have him in spirit. Thank you for coming. We hope to see you, because this is an annual event that goes on every May. And hopefully by May 2018, this hall is going to be full beyond capacity. Word of mouth. Somebody did ask a question as to how can we disseminate the information. Sometimes when you tell one friend, and one friend tells two friends, and so on and so on. This is how we are going to disseminate the good news of the United African Organization. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And that marks the end. That marks the end of the summit. Thank you.